welcome to Immigrants Speak. This is Lily Tang Williams. I have a very special guest. I'm so excited to have Dr. James Lindsay on this show with us, and my sister Xi Van Fli from Sichuan province, like me. We both survived Maoist Cultural Revolution. And then we have James here who has been fighting and calling out this Marxist cultural revolution going on in America. So welcome, James, and welcome, Xi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So James, let people know about your podcast and the new book. You have been talking about it, and so people can know where to follow you and where to buy your book.
Yeah, so my podcast is called the New Discourses Podcast. You can find it in all the kinds that you like by looking it up or by going to my website, which is newdiscourses.com. And I have lots of episodes. I've been doing them about Mao recently. I've been reading Mao's speeches and Mao's books, which are not fun. And so then I have a book I recently did. I have a few. One is called Race Marxism. It's about critical race theory, which, as you would know, but most people in America don't know, Mao did critical race theory before it ever happened in America. And then I just did one called the Marxification of Education, which is about a Brazilian Marxist called Paulo Freire. And it turns out that Mao did that too. Mao did a very similar kind of program in his revolutionary high schools and universities.
We feel so connected with you because for your generation, you're trained as a mathematician, but you have been talking about this. It seems like to me and she, we survived the Maoist Cultural Revolution. You're the one who seems like have read a lot, very educated about this part of history, but lots of people, lots of Americans are not, even some conservatives are not. And so I'm going to let you and she, and we all engage and to see what the questions people have. But before we get into it, I want to ask you, were there any critical moments in your life where you just clicked and realized what's going on in this country? How did you train as a mathematician now fighting the cultural war in this country?
Well, I didn't want to stay in the universities after I finished my PhD because it was focusing on student retention. And I thought, if we're just going to focus on keeping students happy, we can't really educate them. It's not about coddling kids. Education in math especially is hard. And it takes discipline. It takes hard work. It takes actually failure and picking back up and trying again. And if we're not allowed to fail, we'll never teach them. So I left. And then that meant I wanted to do something academic that was fun. So I started to argue with people online. And I started to notice with the feminism and the gender studies that something was badly wrong. There was, people were being accused of sexism and participating in systems of sexism. But like most Americans, I had learned almost nothing about Maoism or nothing about Marxism. We have very red-washed education. I think it's by design. We've taught nobody about the Cultural Revolution so that they won't recognize it now that it's happening. And finally, I started to write, as many people know, these fake academic articles, then sent them to feminist journals and gender studies journals, and many got published. But what was the big light bulb moment for me was I wrote one about education, and I said that we should use abuse to abuse kids out of privilege, but we should do it compassionately because we thought that would be kind of funny and upside down. And they wrote back and said, we really like your idea, but you can't use compassion because that might recenter the needs of the privileged. And I thought, there's a genocide at the end of this. If you can't have compassion for people and you suggest abuse, there's a big problem here. And that was a moment when I realized that this is something very bad. And so I actually asked my wife after they said that if I could quit my job and spend all my time studying this so I could learn this stuff and tell people about it, because nobody was seeing it coming. And then I started to realize what it is. I was one of the first people after George Floyd died to say this is the American Cultural Revolution or the anti-racist Cultural Revolution. Most people don't know this. 3 months before George Floyd died, so in February of 2020, I had a meeting in Washington, D.C., and a bunch of people from the federal government were there, including people from the Pentagon. And I told them they're going to use critical race theory to spring a cultural revolution in America, probably within the next 6 months. And they told me that there's no way. That's not possible. And it was 3 months later that it started. So I started to clue in what this is. Part of that is because I did have the advantage. I study a Chinese martial art, as it turns out. So I learned how Mao obliterated all of the old culture, and so I learned how Mao had done some of the things that he did, and set up all this space for charlatans and frauds and all of this kind of tragedy. And so I had a little bit of a clue into this, and then I've also therefore got Chinese friends who were telling me, Chinese American friends who were telling me that this looks just like the Cultural Revolution, and I agreed with them very, very quickly and started to study it while I was also studying, these Marxists from the 60s who all thought Mao was great. These American Marxists and these European Marxists who they had put all their credit into Mao. And so I started to study Mao and to realize this is correct. This is what's happening.
Wow, amazing story. Kind of similar to, of course, and she also probably totally become fighter and waking up. And also 2020, is that true? We couldn't even sleep during 2020, right? Because we saw everything in front of our eyes on TV. It's like, oh my goodness, what is happening in America? I was having PTSD. How do you feel when you're watching what's going on, on TV to see all the, burning top-down statues, all this riots? And were you scared that time too?
Yeah, that is also my turning point. And it's 2020, seeing the BMMers and Antifa burning our city and tearing down statue. And to me, that is absolutely a replay of the revolution. And that was the time that I decided I have to do something. So 2020 is absolutely the watershed moment for me personally, and to make this very hard decision to get involved politically. As most Asians, we're usually quiet. In my 37 years here, I never participated in any political meetings or rallies, nothing like that. And but seeing what's happening in America and knowing that where it's going, and that pushed me over the edge. So I said, yes, I get involved. And in 2021, I went to school board, and that's when my video went viral, and I was unwillingly get into the spotlight, but I'm so happy that happened. So now I become the voice of the immigrants against the culture of Marxism here. And Dr. Lindsay, I have to say, you are the guru of anti-cultural Marxism in America. It is through your podcast that I really learned about CRT and Frankfurt School. And I always say, without you interpreting article by article what it really means, it will be impossible for people, average person like me, to understand Frankfurt School, which is so important. Without understanding that, we will not be able to understand what the American Marxism is playing out in America. So I follow your podcast religiously. And thank you so much. And you are the first one that I heard talking about the Cultural Revolution. And you, I think, are responsible for making struggle session now just like a household term.
Yeah. Well, thank you both in this fight. I woke up earlier, 2008, and that was the first time I feel like in America, I become a more independent thinker, get rid of my indoctrination from China because of the banking bailout and the Patriot Act, expansion of the federal government, and the centralized education. So I've been fighting for over 10 years, but the country got worse. Now you see why I feel passionate. I have to reboot my YouTube video, and it was like not active for a while. I said, now I have to do more, especially now I say the immigrants like us who see the writing on the wall, we have to educate the public. I'm so glad that James is also leading the fight from his perspective and doing so much research and now have a podcast, educate people. And I understand you have to leave earlier to go on Newsmax for an interview. That I told James, as I said, you and I are both from Sichuan province in China. We just have this DNA in our blood. We are fighters. We're not going to complain. And that's where I feel most disappointed is during 2020 Americans were confused, were scared, were manipulated, and all complied. I thought liberty is going to die and we're going to lose. And but now there is a hope. I say the hope. I say parents waking up. How do you feel out there when you go speak to people? And James, when you do talks, do you feel like people are waking up and ask questions and in their own way fight back now with DEI training, with this thought, like the so-called controlling your mind and censorship? How do you see that?
Yes. So I've actually been speaking up publicly for about 5 years. So my awakening was in 2017 and 18, really. And so I've been doing it. So it's totally different now. I used to have to go and people just thought I was crazy or a conspiracy theorist. I had no idea what I was talking about. And I would have to explain just the most basic things about either communism or about CRT. And now I go and I can take for granted people know what these things are, or at least some. They don't know as much about communism, but they know CRT fairly well. I don't have to explain it to them on a very basic level anymore. I can bring up these topics. People are much more awake. What I notice is when they ask questions, they ask very penetrating questions now. They're starting to understand. I tell people all the time, the speed with which Americans, especially parents, have woken up is very encouraging. People are very much more, they're not alert enough, but they're very alert, where it's been very fast. And it's really amazing, the change that we've seen in just 4 or 5 years. So I'm actually, like you said, I see the hope. I see the hope. We did resist many of the things they tried to force on us in 2020. It could have been so much worse, but people were already seeing enough to realize something very not American and maybe communist is going on. So yeah, it's been very encouraging. People know the words. I don't have to explain it. They ask good questions, and so they want to do something. They realize they have to do something. They realize they can't just wait it out, and so it's a much more hopeful situation than people think.
Xi, what do you say?
Yeah.
How do people respond to you?
Yeah, when I was talking at the school board using the Cultural Revolution in China as a comparison to the woke revolution, many of the people in that meeting never heard about the Cultural Revolution in China. And I think now, after I've been to so many meetings and rallies and in the interviews and telling people about the Chinese Cultural Revolution, people really was shocked to see the parallels. And now they know that this is nothing new. It happened before, and it's just history repeating itself. So I think this is a progress. And now Cultural Revolution is a commonly used word to describe what's going on. And I think that's a great progress for people to really understand.
Well, if the classic liberal Bill Maher is already talking about Mao's Cultural Revolution, and I want to get on his show, but I don't have connections to say, hey, you know what? I'm glad you're talking about it, and that's where we need to go. It's more like a liberal platforms where they talk about this and think about how much impact we can make, right? But we just do what we can. And so James, let me ask you, what is the biggest hurdle so far then for people to get involved? Right now, we're still doing educational stages, but what are the practical strategies people can use to actually to push it back, and DEI and the CRT and the industrialization in schools, include transgenderism? How do you see all that fit together?
Yeah, so that's the hardest hurdle. That's the biggest hurdle. People don't know what to do. They're now starting to understand. They know words like cultural revolution. They know words like struggle session, like she said, but they don't know what to do. And so, but they're starting to figure it out. There are people filing lawsuits. There are, of course, people getting involved in local government, whether it's the school boards, whether it's the city council. They're showing up to these meetings regularly. They're talking to their legislators for the first time in years. They talk openly about not trusting the government. I don't know how important of change that is in America in the past 10 years, as we went from basically trusting our government to realizing that something very bad can happen with it. And it's really big. And so they're starting to get involved, knowing that they're going to have to work from the grassroots, from the bottom up. They're going to have to work from those local places first. And we worry about, there was no red wave. Well, that kind of isn't true. There was a big red wave at the local levels, at the grassroots levels in 2022. They're just not at the federal level, and sometimes not at the state. But the states shifted a lot. So the smaller the municipality or the smaller the polity, the more red shift there was. And this is actually really encouraging. We see leadership out of Governor DeSantis, and then other states are having to follow along. Florida, Texas, North Carolina, we're seeing pushes to protect parents. We're seeing pushes to criminalize some of the behaviors that they're using as the tools to forward, like the transgender mutilation cult that they're using to try to advance their agenda and split the family apart. We're seeing parents getting much more involved in the lives of their kids for the first time in a generation in America. Those are all very big steps. So those are the things that people need to do more of. They need to look for where the lawsuit is and not be afraid of it. They need to do like she and be brave and get involved when it's a hard decision. They need to spend more time with their families and protect their kids, because the Cultural Revolution has to split the generations. They have to get involved. They maybe don't want to be in local politics. They have to. You have to show up. You have to ask questions. You have to constantly be aware and keep asking these questions and holding their feet to the fire, because most Americans, when they see what this is, will not accept it and do not want it. It's a very small percent. And if we can just get people to be brave enough to risk, when it's not as big of a risk as people think it is, to speak up now, the risk gets bigger the longer they wait.
That's right.
If they speak up now, then it's not as bad as people think, and we can actually make some meaningful change. They can protect their kids, but it's that fear and not knowing what to do. And I tell people, it doesn't matter how small the thing is, just go read about it, learn a little bit. That's something. Tell your neighbor, that's
Right.
something else. Show people. Or you don't know how to get involved in politics. Have you considered doing something like baking cookies and selling them to raise money for a local candidate? Have you considered helping somebody like Lily in her campaign knock on doors? Have you come to Lily's meetings and learn about what she's trying to do and why? These are all very valuable things. They build momentum, they build positive energy, they share information, and they help raise money. You can do the smallest thing. I just talked to a grandmother the other day in Atlanta, Georgia, who said that she has her grandson bring his friends over once a week or every other week for, this just dinner, and to have conversations with the older generation to learn what American values and traditional values actually look like. These all protect against a cultural revolution.
What are you suggesting, Xi, before you have to go?
Yeah, I would just say that any opportunity I have, I tell people, you think it's scary now, you are afraid now that if you speak up, you may lose popularity and possibly your job. But wait, if we don't push back, what awaits for us is not just a job. You might end up in jail, or you might lose your life, because we've been there, we've seen that. And the other thing I just want to say to all immigrants who lived under communism, it is our time. It is our time to save America, to educate America what it's like to live under communism, that compare what our lived experience to what's going on today. And I think that I told everybody, you have two ways to figure out. You listen to someone who's been there, or you live through yourself. Are you willing to do that? And I hope that gives people really the alarm and to really take action.
Thank you for saying that. I have been inviting people come to my show. They might not be ready to go on Fox and Newsmax, but come to my show. That's
people, or just
conversation.
people like James said, just people around you, in the workplace, maybe approach one person at a time. And that's what we need to do, grassroots, not from the top, but grassroots.
Yeah,
So
tell your neighbors, oh, this is scary,
Sorry, but thank you so much, James, to be the
Thank you.
voice and to be our leader in this war against the cultural Marxism.
Thank you.
Thank you, Xi. I hope you do great on Newsmax, or see you next time. Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah, bye. So back to you, James. You talk about Frankfurt School. Actually, I learned about them too. So you say this cultural revolution, cultural Marxism, that means it started in the 1930s. So look, that's like many, many years later, it's just like all over the country. So you see this has been working in the process for past so many years, even though started in Columbia University. And right now, I tell people, don't even go to those universities. So what is the point to pay lots of money to go there to be indoctrinated by the cultural Marxists, right? And but how come lots of people just never know about even Frankfurt School, except like small minority of people,
I think that there has been a deliberate attempt by the Frankfurt School people specifically to make it hard to understand them. And so it became something like a cult. Only certain people in universities would actually spend enough time to get pulled in and actually learn it and actually get to really understand it. And they use very complicated and dense language, which I feel very lucky to have been able to learn to communicate to people. They say all these complicated sentences. This is what they mean by this. For example, this is what I do on my podcast. I read their stuff and I say sentence by sentence, this is what they mean. This is how it goes together. So I think they did that on purpose. They made the language very difficult so that most people would not be able to follow them. I've struggled in my own work to find, people are like, well, where's an example where they say something like this? And I know, it's in this essay by Herbert Marcuse. So I go look up the essay and I want to go find, the paragraph, but it's not a paragraph. It's spread out over 5 pages. So it makes it very hard to communicate to people. So I think they did that on purpose. I think they hid their agenda very well. And then they started to take over the universities. They started in the 1960s and going into the 1970s. And that's when they were looking at Mao and saying, what did Mao do? And how did Mao make it work? And then there's a moment in Herbert Marcuse's writing where he's very explicit in 1972 in Counter-Revolution and Revolt. And he says, we have to go into the different jobs and bring our ideology with us. We have to take over education at all levels and bring our ideology with us. And so they were able to hide it. The other thing is that, especially since this was in these universities is where it was basically fomenting, is that there's a big problem in America that a friend of mine called recently expertitis. So we're going to listen to the experts about this. Everybody's going to stay in their academic lane. So if you want to learn about cultural Marxism, who are you going to have to ask? A cultural Marxist. Are they going to tell you the truth about what its agenda is? Well, yes and no. Mostly no. They mostly distort it and disguise it. But the part that's yes is they tell you openly over and over again, we want a revolution. We want a revolution. But people don't believe them. So we go to these people who have a vested interest in not telling us what the real purpose is. And then that makes it so other people don't understand. I talk to academics today, to PhDs, and they say all the time, oh, you can't understand. You don't really understand it because you never went to college to learn it. You never learned it from the professors. You never learned the correct interpretation of it. And that's the problem, is anybody who says, no, this is what, this is a cultural revolution, this is cultural Marxism, everybody outside of them says, no, you can't possibly understand that because you didn't get the credentials, you didn't get the degree. So you can see that there's this kind of unwillingness to understand the subject and to put all of the understanding of the subject into the small handful of people who are most likely to distort it for their own purposes. And so there's been this very difficult problem where it's been very hard for people to communicate it. So from my experience, I tell people, when you read Karl Marx, you think he's talking about economics. He's not talking about economics. He's talking about something completely different. He has a complete understanding of the world that he's locating in economics. That's a different thing. That's different. And then they say, oh, you read Marx wrong. You didn't read him right. If you would have read him right, you would understand this. And then they just give you the as Marx would call it, the mystification. And so you can't see it. And I think that's why. I think I hate to put it so bluntly, but the fact is, just like in China, our intellectuals failed us. Our intellectuals got enraptured with the ideas and the career promotion and how interesting these concepts might be in theory, and they completely failed in their duty to recognize these very dangerous, very bad ideas for what they are and what their potential would be when put into practice.
Well, that people got to really study Mao's Cultural Revolution more. Intellectuals who supported communism were thrown under the bus during Mao's Cultural Revolution. One word, one sentence, or something you did a while back, or somebody reported you, and you made one simple mistake, then you are categorized as one of the 5 black classes. So Mao did use Marxist like a critical class theory to divide people into 5 red against the 5 black classes. But it's very subjective. Intellectuals, scientists, artists, comedians, you all can be black class. You don't have to be rich, because there's 3 categories. It's rightist, bad influencers, counter-revolutionaries. But who define those terms, right? On top of rich farmers and landlords and a black class. But as they say, though, that's why I always wanted to warn journalists out there who work for legacy media, professors out there, teachers out there, their revolution achieve its goal, totally destruction of America, you will be thrown under the bus. They need to go study, China history and Mao, what he did to those intellectuals. It's very scary. I keep telling people that, they hide very well, and they know in America, you cannot use, classic now, class struggle theory to divide people. So they use cultural Marxism, focus on social issues to indoctrinate people and get them to buy into, critical race theory, anti-racism, 1619 project, and identity politics is a hallmark of the Maoism. So do you say people realize the country today is so divided and so hateful toward each other? Instead of having several conversations, do you feel like, especially the younger people, they're just totally confused? Because I was told, you did not survive real communism, Lily. That's not real communist society. It's so sad for me to hear that.
No, people are not aware enough yet. They are starting to be. I wish they were. But so what you just described with the classes, Mao's class manipulation that he did, was when I already realized before that, when I saw the tearing down the statues and I saw the kind of destruction of the old culture, the whole destruction of the 4 olds as Mao had it was playing out. I said, this looks like the Cultural Revolution, but I didn't believe for certain that I was seeing American Maoism until I realized the way the identity politics was being used. And this, when I tell people this, actually, I see the light bulb go on. So that's why I want to say this. It helps them understand we're really dealing with the program that Mao put forth. And that program for the Cultural Revolution, like you said, he divided into 5 red classes for the communists, and that's good for their view, and then 5 black classes, which were the anti-communists, and that was bad for their view. And so he created those categories, like you said, counter-revolutionaries. What does that mean? People not going along with it, and they get to define that because they have the power. And then rightists, right-wing people. They get to make up what that counts as. We called them deplorables, or Hillary Clinton did in 2016. It's the same category, and now it's MAGA or whatever. And then we had now it slipped my mind. The other one, the bad influences. That's people like you and me, and we're bad influences on people. We're the conspiracy theorists, and we're the misinformation and disinformation. And so, but what I really noticed is in the identity politics, the cultural Marxist social issues, was that they were using critical race theory. And I noticed this in the end of 2020. So it took too long for me to realize it. But they're using the critical race theory to make people hate the skin that they're born in, to not trust, to not like who they are because of something they can't change. But then with the gender theory and the queer theory, they hold out a place where you can change your identity. You can decide that you're a sexual minority or a gender minority or gender fluid or whatever these things are right now. Just like you could decide to become you couldn't decide to be a member of a revolutionary cadre that was a higher level, but you could decide you're going to be a revolutionary and join the red side and then eventually become a red guard if you committed well enough. And that's when I realized what they're doing is they are putting this pressure on especially young white women, who are by far the fastest growing category for the transition issue and the sexual stuff. And what do we see? Young people, 25, sometimes 30% are identifying as a sexual minority or a gender minority now. Why? Because they're being told that their skin color, which they can't do anything about, they can't change. You're not allowed to change that. You can't be trans race. You can't pretend that you're some other race. That's bad. And it makes you part of the oppressor class. It makes you part of one of those black classes, the bad people. And so what can you do? Well, you can identify as gender nonconforming or queer or something like this. And this is, or start to transition. And so they push people. It's not just social contagion. They're pushing people into these destructive, but also revolutionary identities and getting people to think of themselves as people who have to do a revolution to get their way. And I said, oh my God, this is Mao's formula. And then later I learned about his formula of unity, criticism, unity, which means that they tell you in modern language, they say, we just want a place where everybody feels like they belong. We want an inclusive space. Well, those words mean we're going to be unified here, right? But how do you get there? Is you have to agree with everything. And you haven't done that perfectly. So the next step is criticism and self-criticism and struggle, just like Mao, Dojang. There's a struggle session has to take place to get rid of all of your bad attitudes, your old thoughts that were preventing you from being able to have a belonging and inclusive space. And then when it's on the other side, now you're in unity under what Mao called socialist discipline, but we would call it under inclusive discipline or whatever today, or under inclusion and belonging. And so the parallels get sharper and sharper and sharper as I learn more and more about how Mao actually achieved. And so one of the greatest crimes, in my opinion, because I don't think they would have been able to do any of this, is that we did not ever teach American children about Mao. We never taught what I never heard of the Cultural Revolution until I was an adult. Every child should know what this looks like, what these manipulations look like. And when I started to see children, dissociating from their parents, hating their parents, blaming their parents are the problem. Their parents are the unsafe thing. The parents have old values that are harmful. That, again, this is just another one. So when I tell people those kinds of things, people say, oh no, this is actually Mao. And like I said, like you said, we're now in the education phase. And then that's going to lead to smart people figuring out things that they can do. And thank goodness for people like you and she speaking up, because you saw what it was. You went through it. You in some ways know, Mao had much more power than these people have right now. Some things that might be productive ways to resist, which is usually speaking up and saying, no, I won't go along with this. They have to get a lot of people to go along to create the social pressure to force more people to go along in these earlier stages.
Well, that's why they have to use identity politics. My childhood memory started with public struggle sessions in a big square. And once Mao divided people into oppressor versus oppressed, so 5 Black oppressor groups, guess what to those children? Those children from Black families, that means they want to join the oppressed group. And how did you do that? You denounce your families. You change your last name during Mao's Cultural Revolution. And then you were allowed to join the Red Guards. So it is what I warn people, it is a way to destroy also nuclear families. That's what Marx Engels said in the Communist Manifesto. You got to destroy the nuclear families and free education for all the youth. It's very obvious, we had a session about that. So the thing is, so people don't understand, once the social pressure is so tremendous, and you were born into your family, you were born into your skin colors, nothing can do about it, and pressure you to change, then what do? that you're trying to fit in, you're trying to change. They have tremendous mental health issues. That's why you say in today's young people, the mental health issue is huge. Some people are very suicidal. They feel like if they just trans to another gender, maybe their mental health, will be better. But then they realize, oh, I just made a mistake. I want to go back, and they cannot go back, and then they commit suicide. That's what happened to one of the, high school girls in like a Concord school district in New Hampshire. I mean, it's just so sad. That's why we are trying to do a parental rights bill here. Say the parents have right to know if their kids going to public schools 8 hours a day, and put them in the position of, like being indoctrinated and manipulated by their counselors, by their teachers, by the ideology. You don't know where even those come from, right? Like, divisive concepts and transgender, DI, all that stuff. It's so sad to say what is happening. So you think that the most parents, they just don't know this is pushing down our kids like a dark force from all over the country. Like where are those even curriculum come from? Where do you think they come from? From some nonprofit or from federal government?
Sort of, yes, those, but I think the central coordinating agency is the United Nations. Honestly, the United Nations created comprehensive sexuality education and created the standards, and all of its member states, which included the United States, started to adopt those. And they have the sustainable development goals that they push that have, some of the goals are about hunger and poverty, which of course will be interpreted through communist lenses. Some of them are about, in the environment, like life under the sea, so the water quality, the air quality, the land quality, farming, so that's going to make us eat bugs. But some of them, many of them are social. Gender equality is one, quality education for all, and that's number 4, by the way, of their goal. And number 4, they're all broken into these targets that you're supposed to hit. And there are 169 targets under 17 goals. And target number 4.7, the 7th target under quality education for all, is that education should be geared toward achieving the sustainable development goals of the United Nations Agenda 2030. And so they're shifting education into this. All of the DEI is contained inside of that. All of the weird environmental stuff where they're teaching children that they're in an environmental crisis. Everybody's looking at the news this week and they're making fun of Greta Thunberg, who deleted a tweet 5 years ago,
right, I saw
today, that the world would end in 5 years if we didn't stop climate change. And here we are 5 years later, the world has not ended. She was wrong. So she deleted the tweet and everybody's making fun. So why do they say things like that, though? Why does AOC get on TV and say, we have 12 years left, we have to have a Green New Deal, 12 years or we're going to ruin the world? She's not talking to people like you or me who think that she's just being histrionic. She's talking to young people who will believe her and who will be scared. And when they think that the situation is they have no future unless they take action, they're going to start taking action. So when my reading, again, I go back to the Frankfurt School because it's so much in parallel. I was reading in this essay from Herbert Marcuse in 1969. So this is after he had already figured out that Mao was a place to look. But I'm reading this essay. In the first chapter, it's called Essay on Liberation. I read the whole thing as a 4-part series of podcasts on my podcast. So people can go look that up. And he says that the first chapter is titled A Biological Foundation for Socialism. And he says we have to change people at the biological level to be accepting and, in fact, to need socialism to survive. And then he has a footnote. And this was very perplexing. It's very confusing. He has a footnote. And that footnote says, when I say biological, I don't mean literally biological, like your genetics and all of this. He might. I don't know. But he says, I don't mean that. I don't trust these people. But he says what I mean is the level of what he called the vital needs of the people, so that you can't live without it. And I realize what that means is psychological stability. What he means is that what you have to do to make people want socialism is to destroy their psychological stability, so that they need the government to take care of them. They need an ideology to cling to, like a religion that gives them meaning and purpose in their life. And that's when I realized that this is a very, very serious and very dangerous issue that he's writing about. We have to change people. We have to, in fact, what you were saying, we have to traumatize them at school so that they can become the solution to the trauma. We have to tell them all these destabilizing things about sex and gender and sexuality and how dangerous the world is, and how all of their problems come down to the fact that maybe they're a boy who lives in a girl's body and their parents won't understand. So don't trust your parents. We won't tell your parents. And we're going to transition you, and we're going to give you a pathway out of this fear and pain. The environment is going to collapse, but hey, we're going to make you an activist and we're going to help you feel better. We have to change them at their fundamental psychological and cognitive level so that they can't live in the world unless we make them demand socialism. And then I read Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum. his book from last year, 2022, he writes a book called The Great Narrative for a Better Future. And he explains, we're going to do all this with the top down, with the government and the corporations. But if that doesn't work, it doesn't matter, because we're using education to transform the children to demand the same thing. They won't work for a company that doesn't support this. They won't buy from a company that doesn't support this. They won't participate in a society that doesn't support this. And he says we're transforming the children at a fundamental level to demand environmental sustainability, to demand greater inclusion and equity. And so you can see that they're very intentionally doing this. It's the same program that Marcuse was writing about, that Mao was writing about and implementing. It's the exact same program. And what the goal is, and this is what parents need to understand, because parents will protect their children when they understand their children are in danger. What parents need to understand is they are intentionally harming your children so that they can be the solution to the problem, but the solution is to push them into more and more and more communism. That's always how they do. They set themselves up as the savior, and they make it look like something else than themselves is causing the problem by lying about it relentlessly. But that's why this is what's happening. So parents will defend their children when they realize that their children are truly in danger. We saw this, by the way, in the communist revolution in Hungary. I was just reading about that yesterday again. The communist revolution in Hungary was stopped in 1919. It went for 4 months, and then they were able to stop it. And the reason was that they were pushing the children into the sexual themes. They were pushing the children too far. They were harming the children, and the parents, especially the Roman Catholic parents and the kind of plain, what we would call blue collar parents, the workers and the farmers, realized that they were destroying their children's minds and destroying and perverting their children and harming their children. And they were so disruptive. I get asked all the time, how did they stop it? It turns out there were other pressures. There was wars brewing. There were threats to the Hungary. They had internal corruption, of course, because it's communism. But at the same time, the people refused to go along with it long enough so that all those other pressures broke it apart. And so that's what parents need to do: protect their kids, refuse to go along with it, refuse to let your children go to a school that's doing social emotional learning. It's hard. We have to make sacrifices, like she said, because if we don't, it's what's coming is much worse. I'm so glad she said that.
Yeah, you say that actually a few good things come out of the last couple of years pandemic school shutdowns, and parents start to question, what are you learning on computer? And also they start to pull out their kids from public schools, and states are passing school choice, and more people are homeschooling because they start realizing, I cannot know you're learning that. And which is a good thing, but still, I have been actually going to middle school, high school, and colleges for the past 5 years with some sponsors' help to tell people about Mao. That's where you mentioned it. Our teachers even don't know much about Mao and Cultural Revolution, no details. So that tells you, what did they learn in teachers' colleges? Maybe by Frankfurt School indoctrination. Here's another thing people might not know. I noticed that the Communist Party of the United States do not run their own candidates. And they said our candidates are running as Democrats. Maybe that's why we have the largest U.S. Congress progressive caucus, like AOC and those people, and those people are groomed and picked and have a star power, articulate, run for high offices. Now you have Justice Democrats in New York. I read that years ago. They deliberately recruit public school teachers and groom them to be teachers, to have access to children and to manipulate the parents. And they are basically paid activist teachers on our dimes. Do people realize that? It means so I'm still worried about college today. And of course, K-12. You think the state legislatures can do a lot more in their own, at least the red states, to kind of stop some of the stuff inside of school classrooms?
Well, I think the state legislatures in these states are very important, but I actually think that what's going to happen is parents wake up and they realize, is like these activist teachers, right? For example, do you know they use the word, they describe these activist teachers, they call them co-conspirators. Well, it turns out to be illegal to commit conspiracy to subvert the laws of a state. So there's a criminal charge waiting once somebody can make the identification and file the lawsuit. These are the kinds of things that are going to have to happen. They are harming our children. They're emotionally and psychologically harming our children. The trans issue, of course, is the most obvious among these. Forcing children to endorse a worldview by participating in the pronouns is it seems innocuous, but it's not. They're forcing them to endorse a worldview where your pronouns are where your sex is something up for grabs, something you can change. That is not okay. In fact, it's already been decided by the Sixth Circuit Court in a case called Merriweather versus Shawnee State that can't be done. by the public sector. So here we know that they're harming children. They know that they're harming children. They publish articles saying that they have to use social emotional learning to correct for the trauma and to deal with the cognitive dissonance and the harm and the stress that all of what this existential threat teaching they're doing is causing. They know they're causing harm. That's illegal. So lawsuits, I think, will do more than the legislatures. I think the legislatures, and working especially with state attorneys general, should be trying to create pathways to private and class action. And maybe we have to sue a school district out of existence and see what happens, because they're harming our children. And that's happening in public schools especially, but private schools, it's sometimes many religious schools. But they're doing psychological and sometimes physical harm with the medicine in schools to our children behind parents' backs. So I think that the state legislatures can help, but the most valuable thing that they can do is create pathways for parents to be able to sue, or for people who call themselves conspirators to be able to be identified. And they can also help, with the process of making sure that we get the right people. One of the offices we don't think a lot about are state prosecutors. State prosecutors should be coming down on these co-conspirators. They should be prosecuting them for violating the law, to conspire against, say, in the states that have the no divisive concepts or no CRT, and now Iowa's pushing for no SEL, no social emotional learning. They say, oh, well, we'll just do it anyway. You can't stop us. We'll call it something else. They say this, and they call themselves co-conspirators. Well, you're now conspiring to break the law intentionally against the state. Throw one of those people in jail for 30 years for conspiracy. See how many more want to keep trying to do it. We're not actually taking action, and that's why they keep acting with impunity. But when parents start to realize that many of those problems are going to get fixed, when they start to see them and then document them and then raise a ruckus to the people, whether it's prosecutors, whether it's private, action attorneys, whether it's maybe to their legislators, but to their attorneys general. Lots of people think to write their legislator, but not their attorney general. They should be writing their state attorneys general and telling them. Then what you have is the possibility to start shifting the liability field, where this stuff is very, very much a liability for them to try to risk doing. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's not enough. It's not risky for them. Feels risky for us. That's insane. It's not risky for us to protect our children. It's not risky for us to protect our country or our liberty. It shouldn't be this risky. They're the ones who are doing something wrong. And when people realize that if we turn that around so that the liability points at them, all of a sudden they have to fight uphill. We're not the ones that should be fighting uphill. They have to fight uphill. And then we can actually get rid of this with some, I think, surprising quickness, but it's going to take smart lawsuits. And I think our legislators that care about this issue should be working to create ways that's easier for people to do. Those divisive concept laws in and of themselves achieve very little, except that now we know that there are people acting explicitly in conspiracy to violate state law. Well, where's the state prosecutor?
You have to enforce it, right?
You have to, that's right. So where's the state prosecutor coming down on these people, not just for breaking the law, but for conspiring to break the law? Because then all of a sudden you start to bring the consultants, the activists, these organizations like Justice Democrats, training them to do this. Those people are all complicit in that conspiracy, and it works like a cartel, or like a mob, like the mafia. And you can start to bring down the system by which they're implementing these people, not just the individuals at the point of contact with your kids. And I think that's going to be very, very important for people to start looking. This is a conspiracy against our state, against our nation, and against our children. Right. We have to take it that way.
You got to hold them accountable. So what can you do at the university level? You talk about Frankfurt School, Marxist professors or brainwash our college kids, turn them into like red guards, basically. And some will shut down the professors who say something wrong, or who were, not complying with this, canceling individual merits and no grades and all this equity stuff. But the universities are getting funding from federal government and from state government. But I would say 90% leaning left, and even private schools. What can we do at that level? Maybe just not going to college anymore, or choose other smaller college to go to?
It's going to be a big part of it, actually, is to withhold going to college, to make it well known also why people are choosing not to go to college. What people don't understand right now, I talk to people that do hiring a lot, people in big corporations, people in smaller companies, especially though, and they keep telling me very quietly that when they get their applications, they put people with college degrees below people that don't have them. They put people with Ivy League degrees on the bottom, or sometimes won't even look at them, because again, they know those people are probably going to be a liability in their company. They know that they're going to demand to be overpaid, that they're not very competent, that they are very likely to raise these kinds of problems with regard to the woke. They're going to demand that the company change. And we see these companies struggling or failing and constantly in turmoil once this stuff comes in. So this is changing. So employers, especially in the companies that are small enough to be able to do this, need to continue to encourage this direction, that their college degree, it's not just that you don't need one, it's that it's a problem. And that will start to force these colleges and universities. What a lot of people don't understand is how bad of a situation they are in financially. Many of them are behaving this way because they're captured, but they're also behaving this way because of the money. They have gigantic mortgages. They owe hundreds of millions of dollars to these banks. So they have to have all of these policies to get good interest rates, to have more investment capital access. The so-called ESG scores have to be perfect. They're playing along partly because they painted themselves into a financial corner. Well, why is tuition so high? Why is the focus that made me leave the university on keeping students in? Because they need that tuition money. They're only getting a small percentage from the state and the federal government, but they can't lose that either. But they can't lose that money. So if we start shifting to say, you know what, the problem is the college. The problem is the college degree. And until colleges start to change, we can't trust our colleges. That's going to be very effective. But again, the same thing, lawsuits demanding these people get fired. We just saw that it went viral, this law school at Stanford, and the guy just lectures this famous law professor for 20 minutes about, and interrupts his talk and lectures him in a woke way. And so what has this guy done? Did he just put his tail between his legs and go away? No, he said that it was, I think, the worst behavior. He said it in very colorful language that I'll be polite and not use, but it was the worst behavior he'd ever seen. He wants the people behind that fired. He wants them gone, and he's going to go on a campaign. You have to be willing to take these campaigns up. You have to be willing to, when you see these things, to say that's not acceptable, to denounce that, to hold the administrators who facilitated it, not the university as an entity. The administrators who made that possible have to be held to account from outside pressure, from state government pressure. The state legislators here do have on public schools, public colleges, a lot of power. If they realize that their election in the future might depend, and their constituents are demanding that these bad apples, which are most of the professors and administrators now, get held to account, they're going to have to start to push and threaten funding, do like what Florida's doing, and try to change whether these things are even allowed to be departments in the universities anymore. This is all very important.
Well, it's just, I summarized actually 12 features of Mao's Cultural Revolution and tactics he used. I'm going to put them up there now as a Twitter account holder. I can actually have a longer word formats out there. People can judge themselves how scarily similar, how many Mao's tactics are adopted today, not just by the United States, but by the Western countries. Like you said, it's no longer one country's issue. This is like from United Nations and the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum. Those are not elected by people democratically. They have no moral constitutional authority over us as citizens. I think the whole world needs liberty people like us to wake up, to fight back, to say, like you said, the professor push back what in desperate need for teachers, good conscious teachers, professors, and people who used to be think they're just moderate Democrats or something. But now this cultural revolution it's come back and eat their own, it will get worse if they don't stand up and make a stand. Even like you said, when you're forced to go to DEI trainings, when you have to hold on to your job and career, you think it's bad, you're worried about losing your a career or something. Wait until they take over, like they did in Cambodia. I just interviewed somebody to say, my dad fled Chinese communism to go to Cambodia and start business. He told them, oh, Cambodia will never become a communist country. Boom. Communists took over, marched into their house, take children away, put into labor camps, and dad and brother were shot to death when they're trying to escape. She went to labor camp from 13 to 17. It's like, Lily, I'm warning Americans, it can happen here, and it can happen fast before you even realize it. So it's critical time now, not just for us, but we have to go wake up a whole lot more people to say it's time to resist, to fight back in any way you see fit now. So I want to thank you for coming here today. It's great to hear from you. I'm sure we're running to each other or not. And tell people again where they can follow you and where they can go get your podcast.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. And you can get my podcast at New Discourses, and then you can find that at newdiscourses.com, or you can look up the New Discourses podcast wherever you do podcasts, as a black field with a little gray and white thing that looks like a brain or a walnut. It's supposed to be a brain. And so you can find that the symbol and go to the podcast. I want to tell everybody one thing that's very encouraging. I'll tell you, I've been recommending people read this one book. It's not my book. It's called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, a study of brainwashing in China. It's by Robert J. Lifton. It was written in the 1960s, and he studied people who were coming out of Mao's prisons. And he was in Hong Kong, and he would get them when they were exiled from China out of Mao's thought reform or brainwashing prisons. And you'll see the parallels to America, unfortunately, immediately when you read it. It's a long book. It's very valuable. People send me pictures of themselves reading it all the time. I like that better than when they send me a picture of them reading my book. They have to know what this is. And like you said, if you think it's bad at DEI training at your job, wait until you spend 3 years in a prison having to do the same thing. Because that's what Mao did. That's exactly what Mao did in the 1950s before the Cultural Revolution. If you think it's bad at your job, you might lose your job. Try you being in a prison for 3 years or 4 years having to do this. And forcing you to confess.
Children, lose your property, lose everything.
Lose
You're
everything.
basically a little slave.
And when they let you out, they don't let you back to your life. They kick you out of the country. And so you go psychologically broken and you can't live at your home anymore. This is why you're right. We have to fight back. So I appreciate, going and finding my resources, but I think people should read that book, which is Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, a study of brainwashing in China by Robert Lifton. They will see that this is Maoist very, very quickly, and how scary this is and why they have to stand up and fight back right now.
Thought reform. It sounds like a scary word to me. I heard all of them before in China. Yeah. So thank you so much, and I appreciate you coming here. I appreciate you fighting, and we were not going to give up. This is our country. We'll talk about our kids, and actually, we have no place to go with Windows America. So thanks, James, and appreciate you coming on. We will put all your links under the video's description.
Thank you, Lily.
Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye.